Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are in the world. I'll just wait to see how many people are coming in. As people are coming in thick and fast, I'll just let it settle for a few minutes before we get going this morning. So good morning, good afternoon, as said, wherever you are in the world. Okay, still got people coming in thick and fast. Okay, in the interest of time, I'll get us going. Hello and welcome to today's CMC Prosci webinar on fueling the ambition to be a leader of change. I'm Rhys Tompkins and I'll be leading the engagement in today's webinar. I'd also like to welcome everyone that's come over from Nexum this morning. We're pleased to have with us, we're pleased to have you all with us today. Easier said than done there. CMC Global and Nexum came together as two organizations in November last year. So yeah, welcome to everyone that's come to us this morning through Nexum. Please note, although this webinar is scheduled for an hour, it could run over depending on the extent of interaction and questions that we receive. The webinar slides will be available in the chat pane in a few moments' time. So if you keep an eye out in that chat pane, you should see a PDF pop up there. However, if you are using the browser-based version of Zoom, you may not see them due to some of the limitations there with the browser version of Zoom. But don't worry at all. We do follow up with an email next week. And in that email, we'll provide you with the copy of the slides. So if you can't find them in the chat this morning, just rest assured that you will receive a copy probably the early or middle part next week. In today's webinar, we will also have some polls that will appear on screen for you to answer. So if you'd like to get involved, open up a separate browser tab if you're using a desktop or laptop this morning. I go to pollev.com/CMC Stewart. You should see that on the bottom left hand of your screen there as well for you to pop into your browser. You also may wish to use Poll Everywhere via your smartphone. Sometimes that's people find that as an easier method of participating in the polls and also seeing what's appearing on screen. So totally up to you. But yeah, you can see that link in the bottom left hand corner. I'll also pop that into the chat as well when we get to the first poll this morning. This webinar is fully interactive, so we don't just want you to sit there and listen. So feel free to ask questions, chat in any comments that you wish to make in the chat or in the Q&A pane. If you are asking a question, I would recommend using that Q&A pane because this allows you to remain anonymous if you wish to. So if you want to ask a question but you don't want to reveal your name either to myself or once we've asked your question, it also then reveals to everyone else so they could see what your question was. So if you wish to remain anonymous, you can click a box on that Q&A pane and then, yeah, it'll show your question, but we won't show your name. But if you use the chat pane, you won't be able to do that. So if you want to remain anonymous, use that Q&A pane here to ask any questions. Yes, so if you're new to us, we're CMC Partnership Global. For more than 20 years, we've been helping individuals and organizations to develop their change skills. Our vision is change for good together, helping you to accelerate the delivery, adoption, and usage of new ways of working. CMC is the sole provider of Prosci change management training conducted in person and virtually across the UK, Ireland, Italy, and Singapore. We also have offices in South Africa and Switzerland, where we offer private training, which can also be facilitated globally at a venue of your choice. Since April the 5th, CMC Global and Nexum have become part of the Prosci family, and soon will be known as Prosci Europe. During our future sessions, we will share more information about this exciting move, but rest assured that our primary objective remains the same. It's to enable you to manage and build your own change capability within your organization. So nothing's changed there. For more information regarding our range of CMC Global and Prosci services, either chat in or get in touch via inquiry@cmcpartnership.com, or you might find it easier just to head to our website, cmcpartnership.com. If you've arrived from Nexum today, head to nexum.eu and you'll find all of their Prosci services there as well. If you'd like to know more about how we can work with the organisation in various options, again, either chat into myself and I'll pass you details on, or get in touch via inquiry@cmcpartnership.com. So we've got through all of that this morning and get to this morning's webinar, which is why you're all here today. So our presenter today is Stuart Watson. Stuart is a Prosci certified advanced instructor and a change management consultant at CMC Partnership Global. Stuart is based in South Africa and has over 20 years professional experience working within multiple sectors, including financial services, oil and gas, and retail. So with that, I'll hand over to Stuart to introduce today's webinar.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Reese, and good morning or good afternoon, wherever you happen to be in the world. I am greeting you from a fairly windy and cold Cape Town in South Africa. So we're heading into winter and the season is changing, but we've got a warm topic here on fueling the ambition to be a leader of change. And so we'll be talking about enterprise change management. And I'm really excited about this particular webinar. It's a very fascinating insights, hopefully, for you. And so looking forward to sharing those with you. We're going to use polling software during the webinar. Those of you who've attended our certification programs might be familiar, or perhaps through other applications. Looks like you found it already. In terms of indicating whether you've, well, certainly participating throughout the webinar. So there'll be multiple opportunities for you to contribute. So just first question, and a couple of you early adopters, indicating whether you are certified as a practitioner. So see 42% practitioners in the room, 33% experienced. That's encouraging. Some of these topics I'm sure will be familiar to you. If this is your first experience at Prosci, fantastic. Well, I hope that it is a good one, and that what we do share with you today is going to be of use and interest for you and for your organization. So PolyV will continue doing its stuff. I see we have 54 participants today, so that's really great. In this format, I can't see everyone, so it kind of feels like being on a stage with a big spotlight and you can't see anyone in the audience. So, but I can see and certainly pick up your feedback through these mechanisms. Almost half certified as practitioners. Okay, great. Wonderful. Always helpful to know who we are speaking with. So, you know, at Prosci, we talk a lot about change practitioners, individuals who are actively involved in the art and discipline of change management. But for this webinar, we're going to actually broaden our perspective to anyone who has an ambition to be a leader of change. And so no matter where you sit in an organization or what your full-time role is, we can adopt foundational mindsets and take actions to role model change leadership that also influences others to be leaders of change. So to do that, we need to harness that desire, that fire in your guts, if you like, that inspiration or motivation to make a difference in your personal and professional lives regarding how individuals and teams successfully navigate through change. And so we have a useful metaphor, hopefully useful for you, talk about navigation and moving and changing from one circumstance to another. If you've not heard of the goose story, this was the original version of this was from the writings of Dr. Robert McNeish back in 1972, who wrote about geese in a work called The Lessons from Geese. And so what we see is that when geese fly, they typically have this V formation. And there's quite a lot of interesting stuff going on in this V formation. Certainly as a cyclist, I'm quite used to the experience of being in somebody's slipstream. But when you're flying, of course, there's the lift that you get behind the birds, right? So any of these birds that are sitting behind another bird are actually getting a lift from that particular bird that's in front of them. And so this particular orientation allows them to gain over 70% more flying range. And so what they do, of course, is that they rotate their positions over time, so that as the bird who takes up the leader position in the front will rotate out, and one of the other birds will come in. So they're kind of sharing the load. And I think the metaphor for that is, as we talk about building enterprise change management in our organizations, how can we share the load? And so we'll look at the lessons we can take from this. And certainly the first indication is it's not something we can achieve on our own, and that we are so much better equipped if we work with others. So let's have a look at the lessons that we're going to learn from this metaphor, and we'll explore 5 lessons from the geese, if you like. Firstly, the importance of defining goals. Secondly, the importance of teamwork. And then the importance of sharing the workload. From that perspective, we move on to point number 4, which will be the importance of empathy and understanding. And then finally, the 5th lesson is the importance of encouragement. So we're going to go through those one at a time. While I'm continuing, I see and Hans talking about as a lead out at biking. Yes, I'm not sure how much leading out I do. I like to stay in the slip as long as possible, but just by the way, you can see if you have any questions that you'd like to share, just pop those into the chat. I will pause from time to time to take questions, and we'll take it from there. Right, so let's think about the importance of defining goals. So the number 1, or lesson number 1 from geese, is about the importance of defining those goals. And I think before we look at goals specifically, we must be aligned on the foundational belief that successful change can actually be unlocked, that there are proven models, methodologies, and tools to unlock successful change. And at Prosci, that is our purpose and passion, through proactive collaboration with our clients in providing research-based, holistic, easy-to-use solutions. So that's really critical at the beginning point, is to agree that that these goals, that successful change can be unlocked. It is a possibility. And I hear a lot of people outside of the change discipline often reflecting on how difficult change is and how poor we are at getting it right. And there's often a sense of almost apathy and disappointment that we can't actually do this. And that's certainly not our view. We see people doing it and getting it right all the time. And also we need to agree that being a leader of change is not a reactive process. It's goal-oriented and it's intentional. If you think about where we've come from as a human society in the last 3 years, just think about what we've learned about being flexible and resilient. And the one thing I learned through the pandemic was that sometimes we can change even though it's not structured, and it happened and we adapted, and that I took as a really positive sign. But it's one thing to be flexible and to know when we need to be reacting to situations around us. But if we think about sustainability, that's a more longer term consideration. And so if we think about the importance of closing some gaps from a people side, and for those of you who are experiencing Prosci for the first time, just a momentary aside, when we talk about change, we're focusing on the people side of change. So it's in essence, in any business context or in any change scenario, there's typically a technical change that is happening. So change in process, a new organizational design, and the implementation of a new system, the adoption of new values. That is a change that is happening, and there is a technical component that involves the design and the development and ultimately the delivery of a particular solution. And then there's the people component, which requires the adoption of that particular change. And the people side of change really helps us to close the gap that typically exists between a requirement that your business might have and the result that you are hoping to achieve. It also closes the gap between what would be seen as an output versus an outcome. It closes the gap between a specification and what we ultimately hope would be sustainment. and also the distinction or the gap that exists between installation and ultimately realization. And so the people side of change is what we believe, certainly have experienced, is critical to closing the gap between those respective concepts. So that is the critical component, is the realization of the project objectives and the organizational benefits. And that is where we need to set our sights. So a reflection on research. So Prosci's DNA as an organization rests in the research they've been conducting since 1998, research into best practices in the field of change management. And what you're seeing in the graph is a correlation between how well we manage change on projects and the extent to which we meet our project objectives. So if you're new to Prosci, just to point this out, the data in this particular graph is drawn from benchmarking research stretching back to 2007 all the way up to 2019, and the latest research being released in a few weeks' time, so that's pretty exciting. Participants were asked to indicate their experience working on change initiatives in their environment. How effective was the people side of the change? And they actually answered a series of 12 questions to determine whether the change, the people side of the change, that is, was somewhere between poor and excellent. And you can see the sample size. And the second question they were then asked was, in relation to how effective the people side of the change was, to what extent did those projects that you were working on ultimately achieve their overall project objectives? And you can see for the 503 people who indicated change management was excellent on their initiatives, 93% of those projects met or exceeded their objectives. Those who indicated that change management was poor, only 15% of those projects met or exceeded their objectives. And maybe you're somewhere in between in terms of your initiatives. Maybe the work that you can do in your environment can lift the effectiveness of change, perhaps just from poor to fair. And based on the data, there is a 3 times improvement in the extent that in the achievement of your project objective. So a strong correlation. So we know now that getting the people side of change right is directly linked to meeting our ultimate objectives. So I'm just going to take a short pause at that point and check any questions coming in so far, Reese.
Yeah, no questions that have come through so far, Stuart. But yeah, as I said, if anyone does have any questions or comments, then feel free to either use the chat or the Q&A pane, and we'll get those answered for you.
Great, thank you. So moving on to the next slide, the importance of defining goals. So this is how lesson number 1, and we think about as each goose is flapping its wings, it's creating lift for the birds that are following. And by flying in that V formation, the whole flock is adding to their flying range. And so we produce the desired outcomes of change, not by just focusing on the technical side, the what is changing, but also closing that gap and focusing on the people side, which is the who is changing, and of course the how. So as change leaders, we share a common direction and sense of community. We can get where we are going quicker and easier when we focus together on the goal of longer term, ongoing sustainable change. So question time for you over on Pole EV. What actions have you taken or might you take to create a common direction for change leadership in your organization? So this is a free text form. Your thoughts. What actions have you taken or might you take to create a common direction for change leadership in your organization?
Doesn't look like the polls appeared there yet, Stu. There we go.
That might help. I see some comments coming in already.
No problem.
Create awareness. Always a good start. Create awareness. Absolutely. Having a visioning statement or a mission statement. Creating purpose. That's an interesting one. I wonder if the purpose exists, or if we need to establish it, and what does it look like to create purpose. Storytelling, and interesting to think about narrative and how important the narrative around change absolutely is. Aligning for the with and for each, so the what's in it for me, aligning people around the common direction. Okay, so a bit of a combination on that mission statement and storyline. Yeah, communicating, trying to engage people collectively around buying in. Having a clear strategy and mention of the importance of active and visible leadership, having whether it's a company president or a senior sponsor, senior stakeholder who is on board and aligned. See sponsor popping up a few times, absolutely. Those who are new to Prosci, a quick insight into the research. In all 11 of Prosci studies, active and visible sponsorship has come out as the #1 success factor for change. So there you go. Having a change advocate group, sometimes referred to as change agents, or a change advisory board. I heard from a client I met with yesterday. They call their advocate group an advisory board internally, where the sponsor is not the figurehead, where they are actively and visibly involved in the initiative. Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you for that. Nice to see some comments coming through. So let's go on to lesson number 2. So the lesson number 2 from geese is the importance of teamwork. So we need other geese in our formation, those who are also headed where we want to go. We need to be willing to accept their help and give our help to others. So change leaders enlist others in their ambition. So Bonclair, just picking up your point there as well around creating awareness. Thank you. I saw that come through in the chat. Communicating clearly. Thank you. Okay, so who does what when we manage change, right? So if we look at this triangle, this pyramid rather, is indicating the respective role players who have critical things that they need to do in relation to change. So we'll go through each of them. Elite, I see your point there. If the poll is blocked, then you can just use the chat, so that'll be fine. Just pop your thoughts into the chat. So what you're seeing now is for each of these role players, what we do in the Prosci methodology is we assign role statements. We call them the I by statements. So in this example, I, the sponsor, contribute to successful change outcomes through adoption and usage by. And for sponsors, we expect our sponsors to be actively and visibly involved, building a coalition of support and communicating with those who are impacted or involved in the change. Our people managers have specific roles that we expect them to play. Our change practitioners, our project managers, and ultimately those who are impacted by the change, those who are actually going through a change in their current and heading towards a future state. So each of those role players has a critical role to play. And from a methodology perspective, our focus is primarily on the 2 employee-facing roles that are critical to enlist in your change leadership focus, right? Who are the key role players that you need to make sure are engaged and involved in leading change? And these are what we call the employee-facing roles, very specifically your sponsors and your people managers. People who are in these roles, and just a word on terminology. Of course, the word sponsor can apply to directors, senior leaders, senior managers, anyone who is ultimately responsible for the delivery of a particular change. So, and people managers can sometimes be a supervisor, a line manager, somebody who is responsible for those who are impacted by the change. Now, people in these roles, the employee-facing roles, have a direct and often a lasting impact on change success in their area of influence within the organization. So if you happen to sit in one of these roles, these statements, these I by statements that you see on the right-hand side of the slide here, are the most important role behaviors that you should adopt or influence others to adopt. So these are research-based, and as I said earlier on, active and visible sponsorship is the #1 success factor for changes. And this has been a consistent finding over 20 years. So if you're a sponsor, this is what you should be doing: actively and visibly participating, building a coalition of support, and communicating directly with those who are impacted by the change. If you are a people manager, if you're responsible for leading people through change, what you should be doing is communicating, liaising, advocating, resistance managing, and coaching. And if you are not doing that yourself, but you are able to influence others to actually fulfill those roles, then there's a direct area of focus that you can take up. So question time again: what actions can you take to enlist people in these roles? Think about the what's in it for them. What could you do to encourage people to actually fulfill these roles? It'd be great to hear your thoughts. If you're struggling with a poll, just pop your ideas into the chat. I'm able to see those there as well.
Whilst we're waiting to do, there is a comment in the Q&A pane. So there are issues when jargon is used in an organisation experiencing change and when communication isn't clear from the top.
There are issues when jargon is used or when communication is not clear. Makes it difficult when there isn't a shared understanding, when that direction is communicated in such a way that it's not understood, either through technical language or any form of language that is not clear. Very good point. So making sure communication is clear. Creating desire by having clear vision and benefits. Improving, well, I think if I think about the efficiencies, and that, to me, that point speaks to, oh, I beg your pardon, my slides have just gone completely crazy. Just give me a sec. How you know this webinar is live when all of a sudden the technology starts misbehaving? Just give me a moment. I'm getting back to your comments. There we go. Okay. I definitely did something wrong there. So the problem exists between the user and the keyboard. My apologies. Okay. Intervision with them to manage expectations, show them the benefits. I think that's really powerful when you're able to communicate and in such a way that people can understand what that benefit means and see that that is going to make a big change in the environment. I was earlier just trying to pick up on this point around improving efficiency. So that's a benefit that someone might immediately resonate with and feel, well, that's something I can identify with. We could all do with an improvement in relation to that particular area. So great. Okay, so just going to pick up a few of the others that are coming through here. Discuss the benefit to their long-term profile. When people are able to see what this may mean to them in terms of the future of their journeys and what their benefit will be. Often when we discuss this point in our certification programs or in any of our programs, actually, I often think about the focus on the individual in the context of the organization, right? Because these, the WIFM is important, but what does this mean ultimately for the organization? Because a benefit for the organization should, by implication, be a benefit for the individual as well. Defining the pain points, right? So how will progressing with this particular initiative help us to move past the particular challenges that we are experiencing? Great. So some excellent ideas there. Thank you. Definitely some actions, some things that we can do specifically to enlist people in these roles. So I'm going to take it to kind of a practical step now and, think about what you could do in terms of connecting with others, both formally and informally. And one of the things we often say to our clients is that if your organization doesn't have a community of practice around change management, that is a really simple way that you could start conversations and learn from other change practitioners and help to move your organization along the road of building enterprise change capability. And it's something that can be done informally and relatively inexpensively, apart from the time that's taken to connect with others. Some of our clients like to share a community gathering and actually attend a webinar, for example, once a month, and then spend time after that webinar discussing the implication for their organization. So not something you necessarily need to throw huge amounts of budget at, You can start those conversations and connections with others in an informal way. Right, okay, so lesson number 2, to draw our line under this lesson is the importance of teamwork. So don't fly alone. There is greater drag and resistance. Take advantage of the lifting power of those who are around you. And if there's no formation that is headed where you want to go, well, then maybe you could start a new formation. And when your direction is accurate and important, others will follow. So that brings us along to our third lessons, the importance of sharing the workload. So being a leader of change is not just about enlisting others in our shared goal. It is also about building and drawing upon the strengths of others. So if I go back to the picture earlier on, we were discussing the different role players, and we had so far zoomed in on those who are responsible for the leading and the guiding and the directing of the change, and who take the form of the employee-facing roles. And now if we think about 2 very specific change-enabling roles, and specifically the role of change practitioner and project manager. Now, the people who fulfill these roles have very specific knowledge, skills, and expertise. They formulate and coordinate the plans that are executed by the employee-facing or those who are impacted by the change. And so, these roles are obviously critical and foundational to ensuring that the change is successful. And so leaders of change, it's important to understand these roles and how they come together to achieve successful outcomes. So most notably, this coordination that happens in the form of practitioners and project managers, just to mention that there are often supplementary roles. In addition to a change practitioner, you may have learning and development specialists, communication specialists. You may also use a change agent network, for example. Project managers typically rely on subject matter experts, business analysts, etc. So these are the enablers, right? These are the primary enablers who may call on additional supporting roles, who are there to support and enable those who are in the front lines. So I'm conscious, those of you who've not been exposed to Prosci before, this might be a novel concept, is that we don't simply dump everything at the doorstep of the change manager and expect the change practitioner to do everything. We know from research how critical the role of our sponsors and our people managers are, and therefore we look as change practitioners and project managers to see how we can support and enable them in the role that they are playing. So how do we structure our project teams? If we're talking about teaming and how we work together with others in our project delivery environments. So in Prosci's research, we highlight 4 primary ways that project managers and change managers actually come together in different team structures. So this data is taken from Prosci's best practice research, and participants have shared with us the different team structures that they have operated in. So these are models, and therefore they indicate, broadly speaking, how participants have experienced working within particular team structures. So team structure A is where you may find a change manager or a change management capability sitting within a broader project management office or within a broader project management team. And so a word about these different structures. There are advantages and disadvantages of the different structures, and there is no right or wrong. They each have different implications. Sometimes we find that change managers actually sit outside of the project delivery environment and provide almost a consulting type support in to that context. Sometimes team structure C is the one that certainly from a consultant perspective, working for some of the large management consulting firms in my own career, I've experienced working in a setting where as an external change lead or change practitioner, I've actually come alongside an organization that has an internal change management capability sitting within their project management environment as well. And sometimes what you have is project managers and change managers who are performing one another's roles, and this happens more often than you could imagine. Actually, is where project managers don't have the luxury of a dedicated change manager and actually have to pick up those responsibilities themselves. In some of our clients, what we find is that project managers are actually being actively engaged in building their capability from a change perspective, so that they're able to manage the people side of change at the same time as they manage the project. Again, that's not necessarily a right or wrong. It's going to depend on the scale of the change, the type of environment. There's a lot of considerations to take into account. So none of these are right or wrong necessarily, but what is actually a lot more important in which model is how you are integrating your project management and your change management activities. So what I often like to say in our certification programs is how we should really be joined at the hip with our project managers. If you're a change practitioner, you should make sure that all of your plans are integrated into the overall plan, that your timelines are aligned, that you have sequenced your tasks, and that your deliverables all make sense in terms of the overall project plan, and that you are working seamlessly with your project manager. So if you look at a project management process, and whether you're working in a typical sequential or waterfall style project, or whether you happen to be working in an agile context, whatever your project management process, make sure that the change management process is aligned in terms of the end-to-end, starting from assessment all the way to sustainment. How do we integrate that with the project management environment? So poll time again. Some thoughts for you. What specialist roles have you, so in your context, or would you like to draw upon as a leader of change in your organization? So what specialist skills? If you want to pop any questions into the chat, you're welcome
Yeah, we
to
do have
that.
some questions to it. Yeah,
Fire
so
away.
yeah, the first one is, when working on a culture change and the value benefit is so long term, how can you work to better gain the support from these groups?
So culture change, when the value benefit is long term, that immediately makes me think about the business case. And we, in all of the projects that we tend to work on as change practitioners, very often by the time we're engaged, there is, or at least there is the beginnings of a business case that represents real value for the organization, something that you can quantify in actual revenue increase or decrease in costs, the efficiency that ultimately is going to translate into some sort of bottom line consideration. And from my own experience working in value and culture change specifically, that's often very difficult to sketch clearly, is how that's going to translate directly into revenue. And so the disconnect, and I guess I'm amplifying the question before I share any thoughts on how to resolve that, is the disconnect for a lot of individual employees is that they have performance targets and metrics they have to meet in a particular calendar year. Typically, we have to deliver X amount of benefit, decrease cost, increase revenue, increase our customer base, whatever those specific targets need to be. And then you're asked to think about something that might be long term. So without wanting to give you a soft answer, I think the key here is to sketch how those long term benefits are ultimately linked to something that would look like a better organization to work in, which would therefore mean that we would be more attractive to our clients, that we would ensure that people have a better working environment, which would almost grease the wheels of the work that you need to do. So it's a tough, and I want to use the word sell, which is really not something that you want to advocate in terms of values or culture. I certainly feel it's easy enough to see the link between changing culture and ultimate performance for an organization. And so the challenge for a change practitioner, I think, is to actually articulate what that link is. And certainly for some impacted employees, perhaps the direction that the organization is moving in might not be something they perhaps want to be part of. So it's a tough one. It's very difficult, and there isn't always the tangible link. Great question. Thank you. So specialist roles and so when I'm looking at the data on the slide, what roles do you have versus which those? So I'm hoping you have these. Certainly, we cannot exist without the technical side of the change. And if you're a change manager being asked to manage a project, well, hopefully you're able to do that and have the skills to do that. Agile resources, fairly low percentage. That's we're seeing more and more projects that are actually working on a hybrid basis that are not specifically agile, but sometimes have elements of both agile and waterfall style projects. Change practitioners, right? For those organizations, you have the dedicated role of a change practitioner. Fantastic. If you have dedicated learning and development specialists or communication specialists, those are resources that you as a change practitioner should grab onto and hold for dear life, because if you have someone who can help you put from a communication perspective, obviously very, very helpful. I can just say that learning and development is the one where if I'm working on a change that has a significant impact in terms of the future state capability. In other words, people are required to perform fundamentally different roles, which are completely different to what they do currently, and that then needs some form of solution that can help to bridge that gap. I'm very reluctant to move without a dedicated learning and development specialist. So hopefully you have access to that in the right case. Change agent networks, very interesting construct. Very useful at times, although it needs to be done properly and not just something that gets done casually and on the side. So interesting questions there. Great, thank you so much. So to summarize, lesson number 3 from the geese is about the importance of sharing the workload. We are not expected to do everything. If you're a change practitioner, you are wholly dependent on the work that others are doing around you. So when the goose in the front is tiring, it's time to drop back into the formation and allow others to take their turn and play the role that they need to play. If that's the role of a communication specialist or a learning and development practitioner or a change agent, etc. So when you manage change effectively, you require multiple leaders and different times and types of leadership. And so respecting and protecting each other's unique skills, talents, and capabilities helps us to build and draw upon the strengths of others. So lesson number 4, right, the importance of empathy and understanding. So one thing we know about change is that we are always guaranteed that there will be resistance. And so if you look at the image here, what we are reflecting is the fact that there is an old way, how things are happening today, which is a current state, if you like. And what happens typically is we find a degree of comfort with the way we have been doing things, and the new way, moving to a new way of working requires a shift, and that might be a small kind of incremental shift, or might be a completely disruptive way of working, which causes discomfort, and that often challenges our established habits, our working norms, our psychological safety, actually. And there's some really interesting neuro research into our neurophysiology, which we don't have time to go into today, but really what as human beings, what we have evolved to constantly find ways to insulate ourselves from the threats of our environment, and we've become very good at that. And often change in our organizations threatens that very sense of comfort, and so we're resisting because we don't like to be disrupted. And so I want to share an analogy with you, which maybe you'll find helpful, is to think about the difference between empathy and understanding. Is a little bit like the difference between hats and shoes, right? So if I say to you, I wear many hats, I could say that I'm a father, for example. In some context, I'm a teammate. If I'm in a particular sporting context, perhaps I'm working as a consultant or as a trainer. So I can develop an understanding of what I care about and the problems that you are trying to solve, when I think about the hats that you wear. So I'm thinking about the role that you might play. So thinking about people who are impacted by a change in that context, that's kind of more about understanding. But empathy is a little bit like what it's like to walk in your shoes. So when we think about empathy, it's more a case of trying to place yourself, in a sense, to the extent that you're able to think about what it is like to walk in that person's shoes. And that is the kind of distinction between understanding and empathy. And so from our perspective, in terms of managing change, think about what it is like to walk in somebody's shoes. And so as a change leader, think about what we can do to demonstrate empathy and understanding. And what you see on the screen here is Prosci's approach to understanding the impact that projects have on an individual's world of work. So if you really want to understand and empathize with someone who's going through change, it helps to understand exactly what is the impact that change is going to have on the individual. And so in this example, what you might be saying is, perhaps the change you're going through as an organization, you might say, we're implementing a new CRM system. That's a fairly broad statement, and perhaps the impact of that is unclear. It's a little bit hazy. If that is fuzzy, don't adjust your screen. It's intended to be hazy. Perhaps you then say, oh, it's going to have a medium impact on people's jobs. Okay, it's getting a little bit clearer. It's a medium impact. What does that mean? In order to bring it into sharp focus, so it's crystal clear what the impact is going to be, what we have to do then is look at specifically what aspects of a person's job are going to be impacted by that particular change. And so these aspects, there are 10 of them in Prosci's definition, in Prosci's methodology, is to describe the way a person or group might be impacted by the change. And so we look at the specific categories that a change can have an impact on. So if an individual is being impacted by a change, it could typically change the way they do things in terms of the steps and actions. There could be an impact on the systems that they are actually working with or using. Might be specific tools, specific applications that they use. Their job role might be changing, so the competencies that are required, the behaviors that are required to fulfill those jobs, perhaps the mindset or attitudes, beliefs that a person needs to bring into that particular setting. Maybe the reporting structure is changing. There could be an impact on how performance is reviewed, could be an impact on compensation, and sometimes on location. So if you look at each of these aspects, once you start looking at a change through the lens of these aspects, it helps you to understand specifically what is the yesterday, in other words, what people were doing before the change. What does that look like in relation to the tomorrow, the future state of change? So any questions that are coming through at this point, Reese, before I move on?
Yes, do have a few questions that have come through. So this one was referring to the graphic on slide 18. I think it was around the critical roles. So in that particular infographic, where do you see your change champions fit? Are they not classed as a critical role?
Great, so thanks for that question, whoever sent that in. So on slide 18, we spoke about the enabling roles. And in relation to change agents, so a brief word on change agents. Firstly, the terminology is sometimes confusing because different organizations have a different conceptualization of what a change agent is. So I'll give you a standard definition as I answer the question. Change agent typically is somebody whose primary responsibility is not for example, change practitioners' primary responsibility is to prepare, equip, and support people with integrated strategies and plans. Change agents typically have a day job, if I can use that term very loosely, and then they also have some responsibilities to support the change process. Now, are they not core roles? Well, typically those roles the change agent's role is not a permanent role. It's something they do as supplementary support, which is not to say it's not important. In fact, for a lot of organizations, the work that change agents do is critical to the success of the initiative. All I will say in concluding on this point is, if you don't have a change agent network and you would like to leverage the support of other people, make sure that you provide those individuals with the support that they need in terms of training to understand what they need to do, and also that the work they do is actually measured and it contributes to their overall performance. What I've seen in practice a lot of the time is people are asked to pick up some responsibilities in relation to change over and above the work they do, which is not rewarded, it's not measured, it's not properly managed, and that can lead to some unfortunate outcomes. So something to think about there. Thank you for that question.
Okay. Yeah.
Carry on, Reese.
Yeah, so I think I can roll the next two into sort of one question. So firstly, does a change manager need to know budgeting and forecasting? And what are the key KPIs change managers use to measure the impact of change management initiatives?
Okay, budgeting and forecasting. So I'd like to link that to the ultimate success of the initiative in broad terms. So if you're working on a project that has a budget and that is ultimately going to deliver a benefit. So if you think about a benefit in terms of increased revenue or decreased costs, and the specific financial outcome that is going to yield. So if I may use the example that I had on my slide earlier, and I'll just switch over to that. If you look at implementing a new CRM system, for example, so what would the benefit be there? Well, you would certainly expect that once you have a CRM system in place, it should lead you to have a better understanding of your existing clients, and hopefully place you in a position to be able to acquire more clients into the future. And of course, as you increase your customer base, that should drive an increase in revenue. So if I think about budgeting and forecasting, I'm connecting myself into the overall initiative, because that's the adoption that people need. The change that a person needs to adopt is in pursuit of the overall business objective. And so if that's implementing a new CRM system, the financial benefit of that should be clearly articulated in the business case. And as individuals, as people adopt, then hopefully that benefit will be realized. And then, of course, there are the costs associated with the work that the change practitioner is going to do. So the time spent, the artifacts they need to produce, producing the learning material, the communication content, running the training programs, etc. So if I think about budgeting and forecasting, should you, as a change practitioner, understand that? Absolutely. And depending on whether you're a resource in a change team or you're leading a change initiative. So in terms of KPIs, for me, the KPIs are actually linked to the adoption of the impacted people. So I'm interested as a change practitioner in making sure people adopt and use whatever the solution is. If it's a new CRM solution, the metric you should be interested in is how many people are using the new system, and to what extent are they using all of the functionality. So there's a measure of quantity in terms of how many, and there's a measure of efficiency in terms of how effectively are they using that solution. Great question. Very important consideration. Okay, so what have we spoken about so far? We've spoken about impact and thinking about how individuals are impacted, and then we start thinking about how do we support people through their change, and that brings us to discuss the ADKAR model. So again, I know some of you are not familiar with Prosci. So ADKAR is one of the models that that really underpins the Prosci approach to change. And essentially, ADKAR is a model that explains the steps that individuals go through as they change and as they adapt to new ways of working. And there are 5 building blocks. In order to support an individual through change, they need to understand or have awareness of the what, the why, and the risk of not changing, which is awareness. They need to make a decision to commit to the change, and that will then ensure that they have the desire that is necessary to take the change forward for them as individuals. The knowledge is the information they need on how to change, and that is typically the information we supply through training on new whether it's new process, new system, etc. And then critically, a transition from knowledge to ability, where an individual moves from head knowledge to actual practical application. And ultimately reinforcement, which is a step that focuses on ensuring that that ability continues on into the future. So how do we help individuals to come to terms with the impact? Well, the ADCOM model is the focal point and really underpins the steps that we take in the Prosci methodology. Our focus is on how do we support individuals to move through that particular change journey. And so each of those steps are critical, and individuals need to have that understanding to make the decision. And so I just always highlight this in relation to design. Make the decision. They need to understand how, they need to be able, and they need to continue doing what it is that they need to do. And so the challenge for us, unfortunately, in our organizations is that people change at different paces. And so in this graphic, you see an example of a team of people, each of whom are being impacted by the same change at the same time. And what happens in terms of their respective ADCOT journeys, if you like, is the journeys begin at different points for different individuals. And there are reasons for that. I often think when I see this graphic, I think perhaps Alana was away from the office, perhaps on maternity leave, for example, came back and had to kind of catch up pretty quickly in relation to. So each individual changes at different paces, and that's really tricky for us in terms of managing change. So perhaps your thoughts as we close out on this lesson. Have you seen empathy and understanding demonstrated over the last period of time? Maybe not necessarily 6 to 7 months, but maybe in the last period of time. How have you seen empathy and understanding demonstrated? Perhaps it'd be really interesting to see your thoughts on this.
Whilst those coming through, Stuart, we do have a few more that we can rattle through. So the first one, I think it was in regard to slide 26, the 10 aspects slide that you had up. It may need a little bit more information, but this person asks, why not just do job shadowing and gather data?
Why not do job shadowing and gather data in relation to understanding the impact?
That's what slide it was in regard to. So the person who asked that question, if you want to maybe provide a little bit more information.
Yeah, a little bit of extra info, because when we're doing impact assessment, we're often projecting. We're not clear on what that future impact might be. So I guess, and I'm almost sure I'm misunderstanding the question, I guess we can't shadow something we don't understand yet, I guess. So how have you seen empathy and understanding? Leadership being active and visible always makes listening. And I see one of you referring to the impact of change agents. We can't say enough about how important that listening with a focus on understanding is almost a definition of empathy in many ways. Great. Okay, so I'm just conscious of time. I'm thinking some of you might need to leave us shortly. So I'm going to round out on this lesson and move us on. And those who are able to stay, we'll have additional time at the end for questions, if you like. So to conclude on this, expect or understand that individuals have their own personal backgrounds and challenges, and that we try to stand by each other and demonstrate that empathy and understanding. Which brings us to our final lesson about geese, which is, or from geese rather, the importance of encouragement. So change leaders give support, confidence, and hope. And an encouraging word goes a really long way. So, think about what actions you could take to encourage and to really get people to feel like they are supported through this change. And a great quote from Brene Brown: courage is contagious. Every time we choose courage, we make everyone around us a little better and the world a little braver. So, how could we support or encourage those who are going through change? So think about what you might do to build change capability. And so those of you who are practitioners already will know that certainly being part of a Prosci certification program is really useful to help you understand what you need to do specifically to enable and equip those who are going through the change. But when you think about the other role players, there are role-specific interventions which may certainly support and provide the capability that the individuals who are fulfilling the role as sponsors or managers or even our project managers, one-day program on understanding change can be really, really powerful for them as well. So our final lesson is the importance of encouragement. And so, yeah, apparently geese honk. I think that's the official word. So this is not honking in the traffic at somebody. This is how do we encourage others verbally? How do we support them? Maybe that might be a formal training initiative that they may require, but maybe it's just a word of encouragement that could support them as they do what they need to do. So our final poll question, maybe your reflection as we conclude for today, one action of encouragement that you would take today to offer support, confidence, or hope is, what could you do to encourage and support others? And if you are leaving us now, just a big thank you from our side. Thank you for being part of this. It was really nice to have all your questions. So yeah, pop your thoughts onto the poll, and Reese, we can take some of those other questions now.
Cool. So adding on to the topic on measuring change effectiveness, if a change is not quite quantifiable, what would possibly be some strategies that we can use as some form of indicators?
Yeah. So if it's not quantifiable, so that's the challenge. I'm often at the outset, depending on when you are engaged to help work on the people side of change, I've experienced being asked to help on a change when the change has gone live, but adoption's been really low, and you're asked to come in and help to, solve the people challenges, which is always a very difficult ask because there's a lot of course, a lot of preparatory work one needs to do before you actually get into that. So I have a big question mark over, if there's no way of quantifying benefit, that makes it super difficult to actually engage people in terms of communicating the benefit, what's in it for them, what is the future state going to look like. I mean, if there's no quantifiable benefit, then what do you actually hang your change efforts on if it's not quantifiable? So, so maybe there is a benefit and it's visible but not quantifiable. Okay, so if that's the case, how do we focus on, there's the three levels that we can really bring to bear when we assess the effectiveness of change. The first level is a measure of the extent to which we are doing what we believe is necessary. And that sounds really fundamental or very basic, but in essence, if we believe, 10 communications need to go out in a specific context in order to highlight and enable people to understand what this is about. We need to make sure that we have X number of training sessions that cover, the total user base. So there's quantity metrics that you might use to assess, yes, we're doing what we said we were doing. Now that's a very basic level of trying to assess what you're doing. So it's really a measure of, are we doing what we said we would do, which is very basic. The second way of assessing is to determine whether the work that you are doing as a change practitioner is helping people to shift from their current state to their future state. In other words, if you look at the ADKAR components, if the work that you have put into building awareness, you can actually determine through an ADKAR questionnaire, for example, whether the work you're doing is actually helping people to understand the what, the why, and the risk of not changing. So that's another level of assessment that you can try to determine, is the work that I'm doing actually making a difference? The final level is going to be the one that I feel is most important, is this actually making a difference for the organization? In other words, in real terms, are we seeing an increase in customer base? Are we seeing decreased cost, increased efficiencies, those formal metrics? And to the challenge that was set in the question, if it's not quantifiable, there's a good chance that you're not going to be seeing that. So So yes, there's stuff we can do in the meantime. I see Leo is saying, if the change is not quantifiable, first imagine the worst and best scenarios. That gives you a boundary to shift. Fantastic, from qualitatively to objective thinking and filling the gap. Yeah, and to Wilhelm, or Willem, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name there. The benefit for the company and not the people. I'm almost wondering, shouldn't those be one and the same thing? Back to the point I made around what's in it for me. The what's in it for me component. If there's a benefit for the organization and you're part of the organization, then by implication, the what's in it for me and the benefit of the organization are one and the same thing. We typically, our organizations are collectives, and hopefully they should be shared. Yes, but in reality, not always the case, and that makes it difficult. Perhaps people can't see the link between the what's in it for me in terms of I always like to think that if the organization has a goal of increasing their customer base, for example, that means it's a link towards sustainability and increased relevance, and the organization is likely to be successful into the future, and therefore there's a place for me, as opposed to me looking at it very selfishly and saying, how does this contribute to my role specifically? A lot of change we're facing at the moment is AI, for example. I mean, just drop that can of worms on the table. Oh, what's that going to mean for knowledge workers? How's that going to change our world? Well, I don't know if we really know how it's going to change our world. But the point is that if we can look to embrace and move forward in that direction, maybe the what's in it for me, maybe your job or others' jobs might be directly impacted by that. But perhaps there's opportunity in that we as a collective, an organization, can appreciate, as opposed to looking at it in a very narrow sense. Anyway, could be quite a philosophical discussion. So yeah, I think if there are no further questions, Reese, do you want to close out for now?
Yeah, I can close out. There is a couple of comments, questions, but we can get those answered while I put the final poll on screen. So the first comment is, one of the lessons learned in observations, I guess in their experience, is that when you speak with people, everyone wants or will be able to change until the moment they have to change themselves. So that was an interesting comment there.
Yeah.
And then the second one is a question. So what if the sponsor and project manager do not understand the value and importance of a positive change experience, but instead only focus on output tasks?
Yeah, so if I just comment briefly, I mean, that is something I've experienced, and maybe some of you have as well. If it's just focused on ticking boxes, output tasks, there's no real appreciation for the value that the change can deliver. That forces you into a space of checking boxes, and can be very challenging in terms of actually achieving real positive outcomes. So my strategy in that specific context, my strategy would be to try to demonstrate practically how the work you do as a change practitioner will contribute to overall outcomes of the initiative. In other words, lift it out of the discussion of comms and training, etc., and talk about, well, if I get this right, it means adoption, and adoption means we succeed. To try and draw that out specifically, so that there's, you've got to shift away from that box ticking space, or else, there won't be a common understanding of the value of change. And just to comment that earlier question, I mean, that's everybody wants change until it impacts on you, and that's a reality we all deal with. Yeah. Thank you for those questions.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, so I think if you move on a couple of slides, got the upcoming webinars.
Great. I shall move to that slide.
So while Stuart's getting to there, so yeah, thanks everyone for joining us this morning. Thanks for holding on an extra 10 minutes. We had some great interaction this morning, great questions coming through. So that's really what makes these webinars what they are. So thanks very much for that. As you can see on your screen, our next webinar now is in a couple of weeks' time, on Friday, the 26th of May. So if you're interested in integrating project management, change management, how those two disciplines work together, how they can work together with Prosci methodology, then that webinar will be perfect for you. So all you project managers out there, you won't want to miss that one. And then later on in June, so our last webinar of this series, so very much an introductory webinar. So if you come new to us halfway through this series, and you'd like to take a little bit of a step back, understand a little bit more about change management, the basics change management, with a focus obviously on the Prosci methodology, then yeah, you might want to attend that one as well. So that's on Friday the 16th of June. So if you head to our website, cmcpartnership.com, you'll be able to find all the registration details there. But if you are signed up for our email list, then you will also receive an email close to this time inviting you to those webinars. So we hope to see you there. So yeah, as we wrap up, then you have seen a poll pop up on your screen. So yeah, if any of those sections, any of those options rather, pique your interest, then tick any of those selections that work for you. So we've got Prosci change management for you, or Prosci change management for your organization, or if you just want to hear more about our latest news and updates from CMC or details on upcoming webinars, just tick your selection and we'll process that all for you, pass the details on if you require a follow-up. And yeah, we'll be in touch with you very soon. So thanks very much for joining us, everyone. We hope to see you on another webinar or at one of our events very soon. So have a great weekend, and thanks very much, Stuart, for your time.
Thank you. Cheers.